Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. There's a new plan to reopen the Christ Church Cathedral in stages. It's after the reinstatement of the iconic building came to a standstill last year when the project was unable to secure an extra $85 to $95 million. The new plan still comes with a funding shortfall of about $40 to $45 million. This news is just the latest in a saga that's haunted Cantabrians since the cathedral was severely damaged in the Canterbury Earthquakes. Today on The Front Page, we speak with former National MP and Minister supporting Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Nicky Wagner, about what it was like early on, behind the curtain, when those hard decisions were being made. But first, we hear about the latest announcement from Newstalk ZB reporter Jaime Cunningham. So tell me, Jaime, what's the latest development?
Well, we've got news that there's a new staged plan to rebuild and refurbish the cathedral, hopefully reopening it to the public by 2030. Of course, the rebuild was paused indefinitely last August because of an $85 million shortfall. And at that point, there was $82 million poured into the rebuild. Another $6 million has gone in since then. And so this new plan, it involves opening the front half pretty much of the cathedral. So the entranceway, the nave, which is the seating area, the tower bell and the rose window. And so that plan, opening just this section, will halve that funding shortfall to $45 million, as the Anglican Church has pledged to give another $20 million, which they weren't originally going to do. We've also talked to the reinstatement group chair, Mark Stewart. He says they're hoping this funding shortfall, the $45 million, comes from the government and the City Council. The City Council have pledged to donate $10 million, but only $3 million has been received at the moment. And of course, the government declined an emergency, I guess, from the team last year asking for more money. So it's a bit up in the air, but they're hopeful that because it's not as much as the original shortfall, that this may be able to go through and the public will come through just in time for the 150th anniversary in 2031 of the cathedral.
So in terms of that funding shortfall, that's been cut in half, right? So they were looking for $85 to $95 million last year, and then now saying, look, we only need $40 to $45 million, but eventually they will still need that extra money to open up the rest of the cathedral, right? What are they hoping happens between now and then?
Yeah, well, the Dean of the cathedral, Ben Truman, he's really hopeful that once it gets to this first stage opening in 2030, that this will attract the tourists, just people of Christchurch, into the area and will just create more opportunities for them. Private investors will also, I guess, see the opportunity of donating to this project and what it does for Christchurch. And Truman is really hopeful that after this first stage gets to the point of opening, that it will kind of just create a domino effect and more money will come from the avenues they've already received. So 20 million roundabout have come from private investors already to this point.
And what was it like there at the announcement? I mean, did it feel like a real last-ditch effort?
It was my first time going inside the fencing, and you just can't imagine how much organisation it has. From the outside, it doesn't look like much, but there's such a big area. They've got offices right next to the cathedral, and it's clear that this has been in the works for a while. It was very organised. All the people there were very upbeat. It seems like after a turbulent last year that they're really hopeful that this plan is going to work, and it does seem like it is a better option that they probably could have considered before this point, but they're really hopeful that because Christchurch is humming, that it's going to be successful.
And you mentioned the first stage includes the cathedral part, so that's with all the chairs and the pews and things, and a couple of other things. What would be the second stage, I suppose? How many stages did they say?
They don't have any clarity around the rest of the stages, but they have said that actually when the cathedral was originally built for opening in 1881, that it took 40 years in stages. So they're kind of mirroring how it was originally built. And so I guess for them, it's really just the focus of getting that entranceway open so people can go inside and see what it's like. Of course, there's been tours, but around 700 people can fit in the seating area once they get it open. And then from there, it's just, I guess, what's the most viable and what makes sense to open next.
Well, let's hope it doesn't take another 40 years. Thank you so much for joining us, Jaime.
Thank you.
When Nicky Wagner was put in charge of regenerating Christchurch, she said she was excited and up for the challenge. She said, "We've got through the disaster, now we're moving on to the regeneration phase." She joins us now. So first off, Nicky, after the quakes, the cathedral sat broken and neglected for years. Now, there was a lot of back and forth in the beginning, court cases and the like, appeals, etc. Then in 2015, a working group was established, and finally a 2017 final report came through. Take us from there.
Yes, well, when that report came through, basically it said that for $104 million, you could reinstate the cathedral. It meant that that was more than $50,000 more than the insurance for the church. The church had something like $42 million worth of insurance. So it was a matter of finding that difference between the two and how that could happen. But you really can't understand the decisions that were made in 2017 unless you understand the debate that went on before that time, and also the significance of the Christchurch Cathedral. And if you go back to the very early days, before people actually turned up in Christchurch, they were thinking of a cathedral. So it predated people even arriving here. And they were only here for about 6 years before they were seriously driving the cathedral. And 14 years after they turned up, they started building it. And if you consider there was only 3,000 to 4,000 European settlers in that time, and very few Maori, because they just used the Canterbury area as more seasonal hangakai collection and just visiting. They didn't actually live on the Christchurch area. 3,000 or 4,000 people committed to building that cathedral. And it did take 40 years. It did stop in the middle because they ran out of money. But you think of what a huge undertaking it was for such a small number of people.
How would you describe the cathedral and what it means to the people of Christchurch, to people outside of the city? Because I'm sure that you've had this multiple times. People who are just saying, well, why don't you just bowl it down? Why do you need it? It's a church, Absolutely. It's religious, da-da-da.
Yep, absolutely. And that was the big debate. And I suspect it was probably a 50-50-ish debate. I mean, some of the surveys said 58% of the people wanted to rebuild it, but then they thought twice when they thought of the money. So It was a pretty general discussion. And that's why the discussion was so heated and so passionate for over 6 years. But the issue really was that it sat in the centre of Christchurch. Now, if you think about Christchurch when it was first built, it was much smaller. It was where people walked past every day. They saw it every day. When I was a child in the 50s and 60s, it used to be the centre of the cities. All the buses stopped there. So everybody who went anywhere into the city, the trams or the buses, they went past the cathedral. There were 6 cinemas in Cathedral Square. And if you look at the pictures back from that time, it was often absolutely full of people, crowds that you'd never see these days in that sort of area. So it was very much central to the life of Christchurch. And on top of that, it had traditions that most families, regardless of whether they were Anglicans or any kind of religion or non-religion, they would pop in there at Christmas and put something under the big, huge Christmas tree. And most Christchurch people would say, oh, yes, we used to go there at Christmas. And they also had the spire. And that was almost like a rite of passage for kids to climb up the curling steps to the spire and look out over this busy, vibrant square full of people. So it was very much part of the environment, what you did of a day, you knew it existed, and whether you were actually involved in the religion and went to church there was beside the point. On top of that, of course, it had the bells, and the bells used to ring out, and they would ring out across Christchurch, so people heard it as well. So it was very much part of a Christchurch lifestyle. And then on top of that, it was used as a symbol. And if you think back to the news on telly when it first came in, they had pictures of the cathedral representing Christchurch. We had a television program all about Christchurch, and the pictures of the cathedral came up first. It was there. If you got something from the city council, there was a picture of the cathedral on the invoice. And for a while, we had the slogan, Christchurch is the city that shines. And there was a picture of the cathedral with a winding path going up to it. So it was, whether you cared about it or actively noticed it, it was always there.
I imagine then it became just a stark reminder of the tragedy that happened during the Canterbury Earthquakes as well, having to walk past the ruins every day and still, for some people, having to see it there. It must be very difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that was very much the feeling of the debate at the time. Until we put this debate to bed and make a decision, the city can't move on. For many people, it was like the heart of the city. And it wasn't just the building itself, it was Cathedral Square as well. And it was a really strong statement that while this building is looking broken, Christchurch will be seen to be broken and felt to be broken.
So we're in 2017, $107 million cost. The government's fronting grants and loans of $25 million. The council's fronting $10 million, and they reckon they'll get the rest of it raised, and they wanted it done by 2027. Now, obviously, that hasn't happened.
That's right. At
the time, did you see those plans? Because there was a lot of numbers being thrown around about, but this report says it can cost 60 odd million. This one over here says it's going to cost this. Did you truly believe that it was going to be 107 million and it was going to be done by 2027?
Probably not, to the extent that common sense would tell you that all buildings escalate, and a complex reinstatement like that. And remembering it wasn't a restoration. We weren't putting it back brick by brick. We were actually upgrading it as well so that it was more fit for purpose going forward, which makes good common sense. Certainly the timing, I have to say, we've always been optimistic about the timing for the rebuild of Christchurch. But when I look back on it, I'm really glad we were. When we first started talking about rebuilding Christchurch as a whole, overseas people said 25 years. It takes 25 years to rebuild a city. And we sat there and said, really, 25 years? Look, we're young, we're vital, we're going to make it happen, we're a small country, we've only got one layer of government, surely we can do it faster than that. And so we thought 10, 15 years maybe. But in reality, if we had told the people of Christchurch, look, forget about it for 25 years, I don't know if the people would be here. A lot of people, particularly people with young children, they left because they just didn't want their children to see this broken city. And I live in the centre city, and we had demolition probably for 2 years, every single day. You just heard the demolition. And then we had another 2 years of building. And the funny thing was, there was a totally different headspace from demolition to building. Demolition, it was coming down. Building was building it up. So we felt much more enthusiastic in the next 2 years, but even so, it was a huge disruption. So I think if we had been not as optimistic, probably we would have seen a worse outcome for Christchurch. And I think, yes, we've waited, but you can see how wonderful the results have been in so many ways. People are coming to Christchurch now. We've managed to keep the cost of housing down. Young people are coming to the university. Walking through round the river is fantastic. The new sports centre, the new stadium, it's certainly Christchurch is really going ahead out of that disaster.
Of course, at the time, you were appointed Minister supporting Greater Christchurch Regeneration.
Yes, long title.
It's a curly one. In terms of looking back at that time, because I was reporting in Christchurch at that time as well, and I think both you and I had to do a lot of Googling and try and, remember what it was like during that time. And I completely forgot about the animosity towards Bishop Victoria Matthews, because she was heralded, she was really championing the idea of a modern cathedral, which would obviously cost a lot less. And she carried that through all of the discussions. And of course, after this 2017 report and decision came out, she resigned 6 months later.
Any regrets? I think early on, I probably should have gone to the people who were screaming the loudest and saying, we can't do it this way. Let's talk. We kept saying we were going to do that, and then there'd be another lawsuit, and it never happened. I wish I'd gotten in before one of those lawsuits.
And who are those people you're talking about?
I'm not going to name names.
In terms of groups at all?
Heritage, people who cared about the reinstatement for the cathedral, but I'm not getting into names. It's not personal.
Do you think that she's sitting somewhere, perhaps somewhere in Canada? Because she really does have an I told you so moment, right? Because I think we could have had 3 or 4 modern cathedrals by now.
I think you're right. I think there was a huge animosity towards her. But I think, again, you've got to consider the context. Everybody's looking for a scapegoat. When you have a major disaster, everybody pulls together. And I have to say, I've never been so proud of the people of Christchurch as they manage that first few days, weeks, months. But after a while, they get tired, they get worn down, they get fractious, and everybody's looking for a scapegoat. And she was a pretty good scapegoat. The argument was, she doesn't understand us. She's foreign. She doesn't know. But I was listening. As I say, I Googled and looked back on her. Everything she said was very reasonable and very thoughtful, and actually in line with what the church should do. What she said was, we only have $42 million. It's the church itself is not really fit for purpose. She also made the statement that the whole world went, ah! She said, go to any small town in England and you'll see a similar building, and she's absolutely right. But they were not the sort of things we wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And
I think at one point she actually said it's not like it's the Taj Mahal.
That's right, she did.
It's like, don't, she's right, but don't say it.
Say that to us, I know. And I don't think she really, we had long conversations. I would meet with her every Sunday afternoon and we would have coffee, and we talked and talked and talked and talked. And she felt bullied by some of these groups. She felt her intrinsic belief was we should be looking after the people, that it's only a building. But she could get no traction on that because everybody says, she doesn't understand. So I've listening to her and going through some of those old interviews, I think she was really reasonable, but she became a scapegoat and people were rabid about how they spoke about her.
Yeah, and everything in retrospect, right?
Retrospect, absolutely.
When looking at those conversations, it was fiery from the outside looking in, right? What was it like behind those closed doors? Fiery
as well. There were people, and I think what we have to think back, again, it's all in context. When you go back to those times, you have to see how many things had been broken in Christchurch how much we had lost, how much people were hurting. And what you had to do from that is see that this was part of all of that. There were people who really made it their mission to look after the cathedral. Maybe they thought they couldn't control anything else, but this was really important. We had people from all around the world. The UNESCO heritage group was against the demolition. The engineers, 100 New Zealand engineers got together and were against the demolition. We had 2 big, strong lobby groups of local people against the demolition. So basically where we got to in that stage was we either reinstated the cathedral or we faced another 10 years of arguing about it. These people were well-resourced. They were going to take it to court. They were going to fight it to the nth degree. So in terms of a pragmatic solution, thinking of this broken heart of Christchurch, if we could patch together a solution, that's what we were working on, and that's what we did. And in the end, it was the synod who made that final decision. And I went to the synod and I talked to the synod and I explained what I saw. I also really believed that it gave the Anglican Church an opportunity to showcase their place in the centre of the city, and that it could be seen as a positive for the church. But as I saw, and I didn't realise that 55% of the synod voted for it. I didn't know that until I looked it up recently. So it was pretty touch and go even at that stage. But I think everybody was united. We cannot go on arguing forever over this.
The latest announcement is that they're wanting to reopen it in stages. So instead of needing $85 to $95 million, that's what their shortfall was before, it's now about $40 to $45 million. They want to open the first stage, so like the main area, by the end of 2030. And the Anglican Church is actually committing another $20 million towards it. How does that make you feel, that we could be walking in and sitting down on one of those pews in just 5 years' time?
Well, originally part of that plan was it was designed to be stage 2, but it was designed to be staged with the main part of the cathedral and then the tower and the spire later. So we'd already gone down that sort of Lego type of building to manage the money. I think it's a good thing. I think when you've got the convention centre there, when you've got the whole city coming around the river, we do need that building to be saying what Christchurch is all about. And it has said it for, hundreds of years, really.
Thanks for joining us, Nicky.
Take care. Thanks, Chelsea.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in on Monday for another look behind the headlines.